Yeah, Runbeer and I are pleased to present to you the workshop called The Walled World, Breaking Down the Walls of Hostility. The title comes from a passage in the book of Ephesians that I want to share with you to begin this workshop. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two enemies one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside the restricting nature of law. His intention was to create one new united humanity where there used to be divisions between humans. And this freed up space for peace. He came and preached peace to you who are far away and peace to those who were near. This is a passage from Ephesians, a book that was influenced very strongly by the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul spent a few days on Lesbos, the Greek island that we're going to talk about. He wasn't there very long, but who knows, maybe in the 1 or 2 days that he spent there, he dreamt about peace. He dreamt about overcoming walls. And yeah, that's what we want to talk to you about. The passage that I just shared with you is something that I have shared with various groups of people that have come with me on a tour of the island. We went to a particular spot right here, if you can see the image, where a memorial was set up at the village of Thami to commemorate the loss of people, children and adults who had drowned well before the beginnings of the large numbers of people who started to come across. In the distance, if you look carefully, you might be able to see the Turkish coast. It's a short distance, but between Turkey and Greece is the border between the European Union and that which is outside of the European Union, a border in the sea. And just like the passage we just read about, there is, of course, a natural border, but the barrier that Paul speaks of, or the book of Ephesians speaks of, goes deeper and wider and is far more daunting. It's not a physical border. It's a border in people's thoughts and speech and actions. You know, on the island of Lesbos, which is almost exclusively Greek, 100 years ago, there were a lot of Turks living there. And over there, on the other side of that border, there were very many Greeks living. And their lives were intertwined with one another. There was a sea, but there really wasn't a border in their lives. Yeah, there's a border that's more fundamental than the physical ones. The border that people put up in their hearts. The fear of the stranger, the fear of the unfamiliar. But if you do not find a way to embrace strangeness and otherness, it will be transformed into mistrust or even hatred. And there's a further quality to this particular borderline. We live in something that you could call a walled world, a world full of walls. Let me show you an image of what that could look like. I'll have to find it first. Here it is. Let's look at this image. Here we see Europe at the center of a walled world. Those red lines form borders between peoples who exclude each other. Some of those borders are passable in only one direction. If you've got the right passport, what? Are there borders? No. You can flow freely around the world. But if you have the wrong passport, which means if you are excluded, then you can only cross those borders at the danger of your own life. And those are the kinds of things that we've experienced on the island of Lesbos, where people have been opposed and cut apart. I showed you that picture of a memorial. Yeah, it reminds me personally of some of my visits to the island, the Greek island of Lesbos, where people came from Turkey. They were fleeing mostly from Syria at that time, but also came from Afghanistan. There were Kurds and people of different nations. And yeah, I saw bullet wounds in some children. Those children fled because their parents said, we need to protect our children. I saw men in wheelchairs who had been shot in Syria. And then on Lesbos, within the European Union, I saw a 17-year-old boy being sentenced to 20 years in prison and then collapsing as we waited and waited and waited and watched for half an hour until an ambulance came to take him to the nearby hospital. In all the time that he'd been in prison, no one had been taking care of his physical needs. We saw Afghans, Kurds, Africans, first at Moria, and then later in the prison of Mytilene. Because of this second kind of wall, which goes deeper, these people are sometimes victims of a war like that in Syria, but many of them are also victims of economic injustice. And Paul in the Ephesians writes, he is our peace was made the two adversaries one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. Jesus' intention was to create one new united humanity where there had been divisions between people. Let's look again at this image. And I have a question for you. What do you see? What do you associate with this image? What thoughts does it bring up in your minds? Well, then maybe I'll ask more specifically, Runbir, what does this conjure up in your mind? Perhaps you can introduce yourself and then say something about that.
Thank you, Brother Jacob. Thank you for this beautiful introduction. My name is Runbir. I am from a village named Sarkapkan in Iraqi Kurdistan, and right now I'm in Linköping, Sweden. So yeah, what this brings to my mind is many stories. Like me standing on the beach in Mytilene and looking at Ayvalik, looking at all the villages on the other side, and it brings to my mind the nights when I was sitting by the campfire with my friends from 12 o'clock until 8 o'clock and waiting for migrants to arrive, so that when they arrived, we would give them help. We would give them towels. We would give them the heat blankets and bring them to the safety they needed. Watching out with binoculars and all this on the sea, like looking at the sea, like trying to see different patterns. Like if there is a black spot somewhere full of migrants needing help. It also brings to my mind Muhammad from Al-Qunaitra, which is a village which is a city in the Golan Heights in Syria, which is now taken over by Israel, the Golan Heights. So he died when he was trying to cross into Lesbos, and we buried him. And I never saw his face. We just know, because of his passport that he had with him and some ID card that he had with him, that his name was with Muhammad, and he was from Qunaitra. We didn't even know how he was. There was like one guy from the same dinghy who said that, the day when he died, he was sad. That's it. So it brings to my mind 25,000 people in 2015 who were stuck on the island. How it collided with the tourism season. It was in August in 2015. All the ferries were booked up, and people couldn't leave the island. They were frustrated. They were had set up their tents along the shore in Mytilene on Sappho Square, which is the main square in Mytilene. I saw even a guy, funny anecdote I'm telling my friends. He was shaving his shoulders literally in the middle of Mytilene. He was in the middle of of the square. It brings me to my mind all the mobilization that people were doing using the experiences from the revolution in Syria and elsewhere to mobilize against borders, to also open up a way out from the misery they had been forced into. It brings to me the criminalization of solidarity in Mytilene. It brings to me an Afghan guy I visited in the prison in Mytilene, who had been in prison for 4 years because he drove the dinghy, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, to be in prison for 25 years. Slow down. Sorry, I can't.
They just changed the interpretation. Please go ahead, Ronbir.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, he brings me to me his trial, because he was in Mytilene. He was brought from Athens to Mytilene in order to be able to try, for an appeal trial. And his wife was there. She already lived in Germany. She had come back in order to attend her husband's trial, and to see if he would be released this time. But he wasn't. He was sentenced to even a higher sentence. He was given even a higher sentence, and there was no evidence against him. but they were like a law that said if you drove the dinghy while you fled from Turkey to Lesbos, you were a smuggler and you had to be in prison for 25 years. And I remember how they were separated, how like the police let them like to hug each other for 5 minutes and then they were separated. The guy was taken with handcuffs to an uncertain future. So it brings to me all this violence that borders need in order to sustain. All this militarization, the NATO vessels, the Coast Guard vessels, the violence, the batons that the police use in their crowd control methods. It brings to me all these people to my mind. I would like to, it also like, I mean, it also brings to me my own experience because I actually was born on the border, like I was born on the border between Iraq and Iran on the Iraqi side. I'm Kurdish, so we live along borders wherever we are. Yeah, my uncle, he was given a death sentence because he was called a smuggler, like he was smuggling goods over the border. And luckily he fled from prison. He wasn't executed, but he was tortured and all these things. So like the border is very much in my family. It's very much in the veins of my family, in the memory of my family. And it very much has formed my identity as a person. And it's very ironic how I come from a family of border transgressors. And I get engaged eventually with CPT, who somehow happen to work with people who are accused of smuggling or like border transgression. This has been like one of the biggest parts of our work recently. So I'm going to share a poem by a Greek poet. He was from Alexandria in Egypt. There was a very big Greek community in Alexandria, as ancient as Alexandria itself. And Kavafis was from that community. He was born there, he grew up there, and he died there. So I hope that I will try to be slow, so I'm going to share the screen. Waiting for the barbarians. What are we waiting for assembled in the forum? The barbarians are due here today. Why isn't anything going on in the Senate? Why are the senators sitting there without legislating? Because the barbarians are coming today. What's the point of senators making laws now? Once the barbarians are here, they will do the legislation thing. Why did our emperor get up so early? And why is he sitting in thrones at the city's main gate in state, wearing the crown? Because the barbarians are coming today and the emperor is waiting to receive their leader. He's even got a scroll to give him, loaded with titles, with imposing names. Why did our emperor why don't our distinguished orators turn up as usual? to make their speeches, say what they have to say, because the barbarians are coming today and they are bored by rhetoric and public speaking. Why this sudden bewilderment, this confusion? How serious people's faces have become? Why are the streets and squares emptying so rapidly? Everyone going home lost in thought. Because night has fallen and the barbarians have come, and some of our men just in from the border say there are no barbarians any longer. Now what's going to happen to us without barbarians? Those people were a kind of solution. I think some of the poem got lost on the way, but we get the point, I guess. Wait. How do I stop sharing the screen? Yes, thank you. So yeah, a lot of the border is to protect the barbarians, to protect our imagined communities from the barbarians. And every community have their barbarians. They have the barbarized people, the barbarized entities, that they build the identity of their community on. And what we have seen in Lesbos is that the refugees, the migrants, have become those barbarians. And sometimes they are exotified, sometimes they are put in prison, but in most of the cases, they are trying to be controlled, to be confined, to be managed, and to be held, to be documented. So yeah, I would like to, if there is anyone who would like to talk, you can talk, or you can send a message in the what's it called, chat. So who are the barbarized people of your community? Who does your community barbarize? Against whom the borders of your community are protecting?
If I may?
Yes, please.
So I'm living in Germany and I'm currently trying to find a person to move into my flat because I want to move out. And I told the landlord I'm going to find someone to move in. And I don't care who's going to move in, but he does care a lot. And probably he would also use the term barbarian for a kind of group of people that he does not want to have move into that flat. So he's protecting his property from a danger or something that he's making up. It's one national group of people that he does not want to have move in.
Thank you, Lydia. Well, I mean, if you can always just raise your hand and talk. So what we have, the map that Jakob shared is a map that's based on yes, so Lydia just wrote that you can also speak Spanish or German if you are comfortable, because we have amazing interpreters in the room.
Or Kurdish, if you want.
Yeah, I can interpret from Kurdish, or Arabic, or Farsi, Swedish. So what we have, like, so like I would like to share something like in my own identity. For instance, if you ask me like who I am, I'm like, okay, I'm Ronbir. In my village, people will ask me like, whose son are you? I'm like, I am the son of Muhammad, who is the son of Ismail the Red. And then everyone know who he was. They could place me in somewhere. Or like I am the son, like the grandchild of Fakhr Daud. And everyone know who was Fakhr Daud. You know, he was a tribal leader in the area. I have never met him. My maternal grandfather. So somehow like they know who I was. Like they could place me in a location, you know, like because the valley was connected with these threads, invisible threads, of kinship, of friendship, of other connections, of different histories interacting with each other. But if I am out and about and someone asks me like, who are you? I'm like, okay, my name is Ronbir. And then they ask me like, so where are you from? Well, I am from Sarkapkan, but no one knows where Sarkapkan is. I'm from Iraqi Kurdistan. I'm Kurdish. I have a Muslim background. I am married. I have a Swedish passport. Yeah. But they don't really talk about like, I mean, like it doesn't really put me in a, like they, it's like through this conversation, I'm kind of barbarized, you know, because I'm not a part of my face, I'm not really blonde. I don't look Swedish. And my history is not from here. My ancestors didn't live here. I just came here in 2004. So my identity, like, and like the fact that I'm Kurdish doesn't actually say like who I am. The fact that I'm Iraqi talks more about the traumas that my community has been facing in the course of years, rather than who I am. Actually, I mean, maybe if I say I'm Kurdish, like, or like I speak Kurdish, it doesn't actually say what language I speak, because there are many kinds of Kurdish that you can speak, and many Kurds don't even understand each other. So somehow I am kind of alienated from the complex stories, the complex threads of ancestry and kinship and relationships and histories and all these things that has made me, you know, like it doesn't say anything. So like I like they try to place me in relationship to the Swedish community, you know, to the imagined Swedish community. Yeah. So like me and my neighbor, like in this house, we are like 4 families living here. My closest neighbor is from Syria. The one above us are like Iranian Kurds from Iran. Like, I mean, just on the other side of the border, like we are from the same area, but on the other side of the border. And the other person has Italian heritage. So, and we all live here, but we are all like, we are not Swedish. And somehow like in everywhere I move, I am placed in relationship to the center, which is Swedish, white, Christian, or not Christian, like Swedish, white, blonde, and whatever. And the more farther away you come from that center, the more barbarized you become. No? And there are also people like there are also people like my mom is like buying food for someone sometimes who lives who's undocumented. Like the person is also from my community. He's also like from the same area as I am, from Iraqi Kurdistan, from the Sarkapkan area. But they are much farther much more barbarized than we are, because they don't have papers. They don't even have the right to be here. They don't exist. Because at least we exist in an official manner, no? But they don't exist. They are undocumented. So yeah, like this is the kind of the way that somehow the center relates to the margins, you know. And we have in CPT, like we are discussing a lot, like who's white and who's not white, or like who's racialized and who's not racialized, because in our journey about undoing oppressions and stuff like that. And there are like several friends of like we have like one of my closest friends is from Czech Republic, and he is Silesian. Like they are a nation, a community who speak a language which is close to Polish, but it's not Polish. It's a mixture of like they have many German loanwords, and also it's a bit close to Czech, but it's closest to Polish. And they were during like when the division of like Czechia and Poland happened, they happened like his community was on the Czech side. So when the Nazis occupied Czech Republic, they were very persecuted because they didn't want to declare themselves as Czechs and join the Nazi army, you know. So they were persecuted. Like his grandmother always talks about how her Nazi teacher was like lifting her up with her ears because she didn't speak German. And of course, he looks white, but he's not in Sweden, he wouldn't be considered as totally white, you know. And his father's like memories are all about how he was smuggling Bibles like between the Czech and Polish border, you know. So he was like, they were always dealing with borders. I mean, we have a very similar experience, and the memory of the war is very much alive in their life. And the memory of prosecution of criminal, like of being the second degree citizens and all that, it's very much there. So like he looks white, but he's not, I mean, he's not from the center, you know. And we have seen like for instance, like how Brexit happened, like how many like Brexit happened because many white British people didn't want Polish people to be working in their country. You know, they didn't want this like freedom of labor of Europeans to happen anymore, because there were too many in their eyes, too many Poles and Czechs and Bulgarians coming to Britain and to work. So they didn't want that. And this was like one of the arguments that the Brexiteers were using. So there is a lot of racism against like people from Eastern Europe. And it's the same thing with Greeks, for instance. Like they would consider themselves as whites when there are Middle Easterners and when there are people from Africa. But when they relate themselves when they talk about Germany, they say, that's Europe. But so it's very interesting, like how we are barbarized in relationship to the center.
I find that really interesting, the way we sort of set up internal borders. It reminds me of my background a bit as well. I didn't really introduce myself at the beginning. James or Jakob Fair, working with the German Mennonite Peace Committee. I am a Canadian. I still have a Canadian passport, but I've been living in Germany for 30 years. and I'm both an insider and an outsider, but I'm not really barbarized. I have the proper, the, so to speak, the normal skin color, the normal appearance of a German. And so I have no problems in that respect, and can live here. But I'm still an outsider in some respects, and it allows me to make some observations. And I want to share one of these observations with you. Coming from a background of people who were themselves immigrants. My parents were born and raised in Mexico and moved to Canada in the 1950s and grew up there, and were then married, and I was born in Canada. But I had parents who were outsiders in the country where they lived, and where I was also considered to be an outsider, where I was made fun of because of my language and my background as well. But I could assimilate fairly quickly, of course, as children do. And I had the appearance, and I also had the surname that permitted me to fit into a culture of Mennonites in Canada. Back in those days, there were things that we called phone books. Some of you may remember what a phone book is. This really thick book with white and then yellow pages in it, where you can find telephone numbers according to surnames. And in the book for the city of Winnipeg, which was near where I lived, you could look for my name, my surname, and you could page and page and page, and it's still the same surname, Fair. Many, 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 many of them. And the great majority of them were considered to be either religious Mennonites or at least cultural Mennonites who had come from a specific background. And then I came to Germany and lived in Mennonite communities, and they said to me, Fair? What kind of name is that? That's not a Mennonite name. There was a certain code of what is considered to be Mennonite and everything that's outside the border of being Mennonite. And this name was not associated with anything that was known to be Mennonite. Now, there are, of course, some communities in some specific areas where you will find fairs who are Mennonites. But this is just one example of something that I've seen many, many times in our German Mennonite communities, that people will be, it will be commented on what kind of a surname they have. Oh, that's not really a Mennonite name, is it? And it may not be considered to be anything more than playful or superficial commentary, but it is at the same time a way of signaling that there are certain names that belong, and there's certain names that up until now have never belonged, and maybe they will become part of the belonging. And it's certainly not as a division that you would call barbarian or barbarous, but there is a certain kind of border that is established in something that we call the Mennonite game. And I consider it to be particularly nefarious because the beginnings of the Anabaptist faith were especially connected to this issue in the 16th century. The first people who decided to disassociate themselves from the Roman Catholic Church, or then shortly thereafter from the Lutheran Church, were people who said, I am not connected by birth to the place where I came from. My faith is not connected by birth to the people from whom I came from. And on the other hand, the people whom I associate with are not any particular socially identifiable group. It was a characteristic of early Anabaptism that people said, I live outside the borders of these family restrictions. My faith commitments are not restricted to those kinds of family backgrounds. And so to play the Mennonite game nowadays is basically subverting one of the issues that was central to the Anabaptist faith at its beginning. What do you think of that, Runbir?
May I add something to that?
Sure.
So I'm from Switzerland. I have a very Swiss Mennonite last name, Gerber. And I think, yes, what you say is totally true. And then there's, I think, for me, this like in between the then and the now is the persecution, right? At least for my family, and a long period of time where it really was very dangerous to talk about that. So you needed, or you need other ways of knowing who you can trust. And this knowing who you can trust is really also about like creating borders, and sometimes also transgressing borders, or like reshaping borders. And still today, like I would, because it's very difficult in Switzerland to talk about being in not one of the state churches, but like being from a non-state affiliated church. Even it's difficult to say that you're from a church because people would like not take you serious usually. So it is with these names that I like start asking or like showing signs of belonging to that community, and like in this and it's these signs that show me that, and if something comes back, then I know someone is belonging here. And it's also like border as a like it's also a border to create safety, right? And on the other hand, borders can in many of the examples that we talked about already, border is something through which it is there's a process of barbarization or of dehumanization, right? So I wonder also, like, what does that mean, like when there are certain borders that help us to create safety, and in the meantime staying open in a way, or staying having sort of flexible borders of safety, or moving borders. Yeah.
Dorothea. Sorry, I'm sorry. So, do you say your name Hélène?
That's my second name, but Eliane. Helen is my second name. Yeah.
Yeah, I think your point is really important. I have also been thinking about this as well. I don't think I myself, I'm not talking about border as something like as a boundary. Like we all have boundaries. Yeah, like I don't want someone to just come into my house when I'm with my family and say, yeah, like there are no borders. Like I think there are like many prosecuted communities have created many different like creative ways to protect themselves from the community in power, or like from the people in power. And this is one of the ways. For instance, like we have a religion in Iraqi like in Kurdistan, it's called Yarsanis, and they have something which is called Sirmagu, which means like don't reveal secrets. We have one face to the strangers, and when we are together, we have another face to each other. Like, how do you mask ourselves, and how do you recognize each other? You know, how do you feel safe with each other? Because like they were killed and they were prosecuted and they were criminalized. Many of them have big mustaches, and like one of the methods that the Islamic Republic of Iran is using to take the dignity from them is to shave their mustaches in public. For instance, for them, like the mustache is a holy part of the face. Like it's many religious and spiritual communities have different like facial hair rules and stuff, and their facial hair is like, you don't shave your mustache. It's like a way to recognize each other. So and this like don't reveal secrets thing, it's also a way to protect themselves. And I have also, like, for instance, like in the Kurdish community in Greece and in Europe in general, in order to protect yourself from the police when you are like undocumented and you are hiding and all this, like whenever the police would came here, pakla came, which means like browbeats. That's what it means. But everyone understands what pakla is. Like every Kurd understands what pakla is, you know. When you say pakla, it means the police is coming, so you need to hide somewhere. Or like we have another thing for PKK, like, which is, for us, it's a revolutionary organization, like fighting for freedom, and people can say whatever they want about that. And in Turkey, like we cannot even like say the name as a way to like have a political discussion, criticize them or whatever, yeah, like because you are directly put in the barbarized zone because you, first of all, you speak Kurdish and then you say this dangerous name. So we just say harfaka, which means the three letters. So there are all these ways like that. Like, I mean, I myself, like as a part of a community which has been criminalized and prosecuted and all this and colonized, I have this experience, like how people use different coding, like to recognize each other. We also have something which is called the Kurdish discount. So when you go to a Kurdish-owned shop and they find out that you're Kurdish, you get a discount. Like, I have experienced a lot when I was in Berlin. I was always like, oh, you know that. Are you Kurdish? It's like, yes, I'm also Kurdish. And then you get a discount. So, so it can work in other ways as well. You know? Like, when I was traveling in Turkey by bicycle and I was meeting other Kurds, I was like, yeah, I am from Rania, which is close to Kandil, which is the mountain where PKK is. You know, like it's controlled by them. So then I would get watermelons. I would be hosted. I would be given food, and it was just nice. I mean, like it was. I wasn't like using it to exploit my my hostess, but this was a way to. Yeah, but there is also like something that there is. I think there are two different things we are talking about. We are talking about communities. And we are talking about like nation states, you know? And the nation state, for me, a nation state is most of the time. I mean, not all the time. You cannot generalize about anything. It is mainly like it's a story. It's a narrative. It's an imagined community with physical borders. With an army that people like they are dehumanizing themselves by putting those clothes and this dress on them, you know. They carry a weapon even though they don't maybe want to carry a weapon. They kill people with that weapon that they don't even know. Those people haven't harmed them. They haven't taken over their property. They haven't like attacked any of their kinship, any of their friends or anything like that. They have been assigned to defend an imagined community, you know, and like an imposed community, not an imagined community, an imposed community. And I mean, now what we are talking, like what Jakob shared, it's not only like a border between two nation states. No, it's a wall between the rich world, the world that's eating, and the world that's been eaten. You know, the world that's consuming, and the world that's been consumed. The world of slave owners and like plantation owners, and the world of slaves. And this world, I mean, of course, it has a physical shape, like the map that Jacob shared, but it also has like another shapes. Like we can see this world in our communities, you know. In Linköping, there are 2 factories, like in the place where I am now. And one of them is called Scan. That's the meat factory. And all the poor, like the people I know, like all the Kurds, like refugees and all these, like who haven't done a university degree or whatever, like they all work there. It's very hard work. It's dealing with meat and blood and all this. And there is the other one, which is like Saab, where they build combat planes. And there, like you have the technicians, you have the designers, you have the engineers, you have all these people who work there. So the rich people work in Saab and the poor people work in Scan, you know. The rich people create like with design and all these things, and the poor people are like cutting up animals. And the vegans, they go to the Scan to protest. And our friends from the peace, like this very small churchly peace movement in Linköping, they go to Saab to do silent prayers. We have some comments I would like to.
We have 2 comments concerning the issue of names. Marius asked, I can't speak into the main channel as an interpreter, but I'm curious if you, Runbir and Jakob, could reflect on the last line of the poem Runbir read, the one about the barbarians, that the barbarians, in the last line, it says that the barbarians are a kind of solution. What do you think that can mean? And Kathy Neufeld-Dunn replied and said, my own understanding is that having a barbarian unites us against the other. It solves the problem of us being polarized or otherwise disconnected from one another. And then she continues and says, it also creates a perceived need for those in power to hoard their resources or to not serve the people with a supposed need to stave off the barbarians. So that's one of the 2 comments that we received concerning what that line is. I'll read it again. It said, now what's going to happen to us without barbarians? Those people were a kind of solution. And yeah, I think it is a description of a state, any kind of state, that needs enemies. They can be real enemies, they can be imaginary enemies, it doesn't matter. But they need enemies as a kind of excuse or as something to create fear in people's eyes. How do you see it, Runbir?
I think that like we have enemies, I have enemies, you know, Elon Musk is my enemy. Bezos is my enemy. And like people who are owning, who have like appropriated the world and the forests and taken away our, like dispossessed us from a life in community, they are my enemies. And I think we are always like misled to target wrong enemies, you know, like people feel that their life have become meaningless after the coal mine was closed down, or after the factory moved to China, or after whatever. What we have all heard these stories. I mean, those stories are true. No? Like, I mean, that the story of the industrialization taking people from their communities, from their indigenous way of living, from villages, and from all that, instead of actually giving back the land to the dispossessed farmers and to people who had a custodian like way of living, like towards the land and stuff like that. They brain drained the countryside. They put people in factories to do simple things, and as soon as it became cheaper for them to do those things elsewhere, they moved the factories elsewhere. And now that there are all these meaningless towns without the factory. The towns were like built around these factories and these industries and all that, and the factories are not there anymore. So the town, like, they don't have anything to relate to. Like, there is no centering, you know, there is no meeting point. And the migrants come out like, okay, it's their fault. Instead of targeting the right enemy, actually, those who have done this, who prioritize profit before the well-being of the human community and the other than human community. It's not only, we are not only the only ones in this world. So yeah, like, I mean, of course we need the barbarians, but the barbarians are actually there to be targeted. No, we need to name them. We need to hold them accountable, you know, for how they are destructing our world, how they are dividing us, and all that. This is the way I would like to answer this. The world, a more peaceful world is a world of accountability, you know, like is a world that we can hold each other accountable for the violence, for the harm that we cause, both as individuals and a part of like different apparatuses, you know, like if you are a part of an institution that causes harm, you are causing harm. So your institution and you and others around you need to be held accountable. It doesn't mean that you are evil. It just means that we need to hold ourselves accountable, but also hold each other accountable. You know, like, how do we increase accountability in our communities, you know? But I cannot hold, like, how, like we can only hold each other account, like my family account. I can hold my wife accountable, or my son, or my mom, or like some friends, not even all friends, you know.
And they can hold you accountable.
Yeah, and I can hold you accountable, definitely. I can hold like very few people accountable, but they are not the people who cause the harm in the world, you know. They cut down some trees in Hegatorp. I mean, I don't know who did that. Like, Hegatorp is the part of town I live. Very beautiful oak trees. They cut them down and then they built a preschool there. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know who made the decision, who brought the machines, who paid the money, with which reasons. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just a small example, you know, like how we, like, so we are like in the last half an hour of our workshop. So I would like to like actually come to the last part of our workshop, which is like, how do we, what do we think about, like, what's borderlessness? What's like a world without borders? You know, how can we imagine? We have been forced to imagine nations, other imagined communities, races, and all that, you know, like we have been imposed so many different imagined communities, which are very destructive. But like, what's the, like, how can we reconnect to a world without borders? And what are the parts like of our lives that are already without borders? No, like,
Gunbir?
Yes.
Marius asked a question in the chat, which is connected to what you were just saying. We haven't read it yet. He wrote that we reflected on the way the Anabaptists tried to disconnect their religious community from their family community. But at the same time, when they started doing that, these Swiss communities and also the Dutch were very much concerned with, they were obsessed with establishing and then controlling and policing the border between their own church and the world. And so that means they were trying to reestablish some kind of border. And you're asking the question, can we live borderlessly? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
And how do we do that?
Do you want to start, Jakob, or?
Well, my only thought is it works in a small community of personal trust. You can live relatively borderlessly there. But then is it possible to extend that? I'm not so sure. That's my first thought.
I mean, my thought is kind of definitely, I mean, like we all have those borderless communities. We have, I would say that there are like, of course, there will be always some kind of borders, you know, between our churches, between our congregations, between our communities, between our perceived communities, like all these things. Like, there is no way we can like live without like boundaries, you know. Everything has a boundary. We have a personal boundary, we have a family boundary, we have a tribal boundary, we have like all these boundaries, no? And we don't want these boundaries to be disrespected. And it's fine. But then we are talking about borders that are imposed. Like my community, for instance, my tribal area, like a tribal confederation I come from, is divided by a border, by the border between Iran and Iraq. Okay, and before this border was like imposed, my community could like we were nomads, so we could like go to the other side of the border and have a winter camp, like our summer camp there, and then come back and have our like winter, like we usually came back to villages, which were like with houses and all that. But now we cannot do that anymore. I mean, not even in the like, it's because like there is a border that's been imposed, and it's not a part of our, we didn't create that, it was imposed on us, you know. And we were talking about Mytilene and Ayvalık. I was one time in Skala Sikamnia. Skala Sikamnia is a small village on the coast in the northeastern Lesbos. It's the point in Lesbos which is the closest to Turkey. Just 5 kilometers between Skala Sikamnia and the other side, on the Turkish side. And there was this owner of the taverna I was talking to, and he had been receiving migrants. He was telling me many stories about like how he helped many migrants who arrived there, and like how one time they came when he had his birthday and they could join the party directly after arrival. And then I asked him, do you know what's the name of that mountain on the other side? It's like a very high mountain on the other side, like on the Turkish side. And he said he had no idea. He didn't know what was the name of the mountain. And like 100 years ago, there was no difference. Like, I mean, Mytilene and Ayvalık, or like the other side of the border, were very connected. Like the population on both sides were the same. They spoke Greek and Turkish, mainly Greek, actually. Mytilene was the kind of the port of Ayvalık, because Ayvalık doesn't have deep waters. So all the goods and stuff like that were brought to Mytilene, and then they were taken to Ayvalık. And like, of course, like there are so many other connections. Like, I mean, there is like, there has never been a border between Ayvalık and Mytilene before the creation of the Turkish Republic and the Hellenic Republic 100 years ago or something. So the guy, like, I mean, like, and all those mountains have Greek names, and actually the water in Mytilene, everyone who drinks water in Mytilene, they drink water from that mountain. It comes from that mountain, you know. So when we ground ourselves on the earth, on the water we drink, the food we eat, the connections we have, and all that, they always go beyond the border, you know. Like the water you drink, like in Mytilene, it comes from that mountain, and you don't even know that it comes from that mountain, and you don't know what that mountain is called, even though it has a Greek name. I have forgotten the Greek name. So, and like, just like coming back to your ancestry, like you don't have to go back so many generations where like people were from Ayvalık or from Mytilene, or like one part was from Ayvalık, one part was from Mytilene and stuff like that. So this is the map as you see. Yeah. Yeah, but this is Skala Sikamnia somewhere here. Like, yeah, there. Thank you, Jakob. I would also like when you ground ourselves in real things, you know, like our body, our food, our community, the connections we have, the water we drink, and all that. This is borderlessness, you know. But yes, Elaine.
Maybe another thought to what could be borderlessness. I think maybe part of it is also like or a way to start is to don't, like, I feel like borders, connected to borders is this fiction of people within the borders are the same, which is really just like, it's not the case. Within the borders, we are so different. And if we acknowledge that, then the border starts to be, or start to turn much more questionable. And I think to think about like not continuing this fiction of only being able to connect through what we have in common, but also that being different, also with us being different, there is there is still a need to like, or there. We don't have to build peace on the foundation that we are similar, but we need to develop the ability to build peace and to build connection and to live with each other on the basis of difference. And I think that's maybe the starting point of bringing down borders. Like, it's just a thought.
I think it's an excellent thought. And I think like a world without borders is a world without standardization. It's a world without corporatization, without it's a world with not one German language, but thousands of German languages. Not one Kurdish language, but hundreds and thousands of Kurdish languages, of approaches to life and to each other. I mean, that's how humans have lived, we always, when we otherize each other, we actually we imagine ourselves to be the same, and also we imagine our enemies to be all similar. When we otherize the evil past, all religions and nations have the evil past, we imagine it as being all evil and inhabited by like-minded people, and full of corruption and all this. It's when we have the other narrative that's saying, you can only imagine what you are and what you live and what you can perceive with your experience and your senses and your extended senses and experience through your community, of course. So yeah, a world without borders is a world in which we embrace and not embrace each other's diversity. It doesn't have to be I don't have to love someone with a Mohican who comes by while I'm putting my child to bed to sleep with a very high techno music. This actually happened to me. It's I want you to have a good life, but I don't want you to wake up my child. This is what I told him. I don't want to embrace that diversity. Of course, I don't want to have this guy to live in my apartment. But he's I don't mind if he does these things somewhere else. So I would like to open up the space and see if other people have other thoughts. We have 60 minutes left.
Well, earlier on, we were talking about valid reasons for borders, I think about the beginning of the pandemic. I think it was valid for my own country, the United States, to close the borders for a little while we figured out how to get people vaccinated and for protection. Now we're using COVID-19 as an excuse. Now those who have COVID, or we think might have COVID, have become barbarians, or we have become barbarians against those who would come to the United States for safety. So yeah, sorry.
And maybe adding to that, like this question of like, you said like valid reasons for borders, and also we can, like when I think back to the map that you showed, it's also like question of valid forms of borders, right? When you just have the form that everything that we want can come in and we can go out, but no one, and we have the power to keep out whoever, is that a valid form of a border, or how could valid forms of borders look then? Yeah. And do we have them for the right reasons?
Dorothy, okay, sorry, you are not wanting to speak. Yeah, I think like about the pandemic, I have another So I am pro-vaccination. I'm pro everything. Okay, I'm vaccinated 3 times. I was very grateful that all about this, that there was access. Like I had access to this, you know, and I was very angry that other people didn't have access to this. That like there was this thing about patents and all this, that like poor people couldn't have access to vaccines because some people in AstraZeneca and like other big pharmas needed to profit from this traumatic situation in like that killed millions of people all around the world. What scared me about, I mean, like it was kind of a moment of reflection for many people who had never experienced borders, you know, that like all of a sudden your doorstep is your border. Like there is a curfew in your hometown, you know, you could be fined thousands of pounds if you were caught in a curfew in England. Like I was there like for a while. The second part of the pandemic, I was in England. The first part, I was in Sweden, where there wasn't so much quarantines and stuff like that. I mean, what I found very traumatizing and scary was how the state could use its brutal face and say like, we can control you, you know, we can actually like force you to stay inside your home for however long we want, you know. And in some cases, like it did make sense, like because we didn't know how to handle this virus, we didn't know how this virus spread, and all these things. So like they took like the highest measures when it comes to like military. I mean, for me, it was like more like the state, the different states, like, and different police authorities experimenting with how, like, actually how far can they go to stop people from moving, you know, to stop the society, and also like how can they like keep some functions in the society and not, and like like shut down other functions, you know. And this was a kind of also like a shock doctrine moment for many states to impose many things that were not imaginable before that, you know. So we need to recognize this part. And of course, I would always take an opportunity to say yes to vaccines for everyone and all that, you know, like, and like yes for community efforts to protect each other and to protect ourselves from getting the virus. I lost an uncle in this. I lost like several people in this, and if they were vaccinated, they wouldn't lose their lives. If they had protected themselves and people would take distance and like take responsibility, they wouldn't lose their lives, you know. So what I want us to reflect about is more like the state brutality and how it was all of a sudden we could see its brutal effects and efficiency. Jakob, would you like to add to this?
We have about 10 minutes left now, so I have an image to share with everyone. Perhaps it's useful in some respects to conclude our conversation today because it shows how we are on one side of the border. Probably all of us who are listening here, or many of us, maybe not all of us, but many of us. But also opens our eyes to people who are on the other side of that border. And it reflects, it focuses specifically on the issue of privilege, something that I addressed earlier when I mentioned how we are able to move freely across borders, and there are other people who are not allowed or do not have this privilege to be able to move across borders. And yeah, I'll just share the image with you. It comes from an enclave of Spain, which is on the African mainland. So Spain is actually in Europe. Spain isn't in Africa, but Spain does have two small enclaves on the coast of Africa, on the north coast, land they claim for themselves. And with money from the European Union, which means including my tax dollars, people have built a golf course in this enclave in an area called Melilla. And I'll just share the image with you here. So there you see how lovely it can be to go golf in Africa, but safely within the arms of Europe. And at the same time, there are people who are claiming this border between us, we do not accept it. We are going to overcome it. There's a group of men on a fence. Some of them are caught because there's a kind of barbed wire that's holding them in that position, and they can't really move. And that's why off to the right, there's a policeman on a ladder who is coming up there to remove them from that fence and to bring them back on the non-European side of that border. Perhaps we could just take a minute to reflect on the image.
It's mind-boggling to me that there are people who are just playing golf, just ignoring all the issues of borders and citizenship going on so near them.
Yeah.
That's kind of a metaphor, I think, for any time I try to close my eyes to whatever injustice is going on around me. That's just really stark.
Yeah.
It's also like in front of the fence, there's this plants, these big plants that probably make it quite difficult to see from the golf course, which is lower, really the whole fence, right? And what's happening there. Probably the top of the fence is visible. And it's this like putting a nice barrier in front of the barrier that I do like that from one perspective you don't want to see. And like also it's sort of like the plants sort of, they have this it looks a bit like a forest or like like wilderness in a way, which is also like sort of making a facade of what do I project into like what is beyond the neatly kept golf course. It's also like just this image and also the first one that you showed with the borders. I like I feel so much anger seeing that, and thinking about these borders.
Mm. Yeah.
I see, for me, like I see that whatever high borders we create, people will cross them. People will find a way around them, and and some of them won't make it, but many of them will make it. I have seen people living in Sweden for 5 years, undocumented, waiting for their next chance to apply for asylum. But they live here, they don't live. Like they don't live. They want to stay, and they want to claim this right to be a part of this, to be included. So people who come here, they know why they are coming here. They know they don't have to, and they will make their way here, and they will make they will find people around them. And there is no way we can maintain those borders. It's very expensive to maintain those borders every day. It demands a lot of surveillance, a lot of barbed wires, and heat cameras, and vessels, and all that. And you cannot maintain those borders forever.
There's an old saying that you can build a wall 10 meters high, but somebody can build a ladder that's 11 meters high. And in a certain sense, that's the work that community peacemaker teams on the island of Lesbos is also doing. We're helping to build an 11-meter high ladder to get over that 10-meter wall that's dividing us. And yeah, that's the background of the experiences that Runbir have had since 2014, supporting the work of community peacemaker teams on the island of Lesbos. And of course, CPT is involved in many other different places as well, where it's also concerned with the issue of borders and pushbacks and people who've been illegally sentenced to long prison terms. But yeah, we've had this opportunity to share with you our thoughts and our cares and concerns. And we're thankful for your prayers and concerns and interest in this work. And thank you for your attention span and for being involved in this conversation with us, helping us to understand the situation that we're involved in as well. Runbir, do you have any last words as well?
Yeah, thank you, Jakob, for saying all these sweet things. And thank you for attending, for everything. I would just like to say we need to be able to imagine the world we want to live in, you know, the world without borders, the world without corporations, the world with a living world, with a living earth in harmony with other human beings and with other than human being communities. So this is the world I would like to imagine, and I would like to grow, and I would like to invite everyone to imagine and to grow with each other. Yeah, so thank you so much.